Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into the fascinating data behind a massive demographic shift that is happening right under our feet. We are going to explore exactly why some American cities are absolutely booming right now, while others are facing a rapid and honestly sometimes severe decline. Whether you live in a sprawling coastal metropolis or a quiet Midwestern town, the landscape of the American city is fundamentally changing. And let me tell you, the data tells an incredible story. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the Great Urban Reshuffle, dive into the anatomy of a doom loop, explore the blueprint for growth, look at an unlikely urban revival, and finally wrap up with the future of our cities. Section 1. The Great Urban Reshuffle. Let's start by zooming way out to look at the macro demographic shifts happening all across the country. We're pulling from a really comprehensive Finance Buzz study that analyzed 117 of America's biggest cities, tracking population changes, job markets, and housing data from 2019 to 2022. Now, the contrast between the winners and losers of this reshuffle is just stark. You've got shrinking coastal giants like San Francisco seeing a staggering population drop of over 8%, and New York really struggling to hold on to its residents. But then, on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you have these booming Sunbelt hubs. Frisco, Texas grew by nearly 10%, and we're seeing similar explosive growth in Arizona cities like Gilbert and Chandler. It's a massive geographic pivot. And one of the most obvious symptoms of all these population shifts is the housing disparity. Take New Orleans, a city dealing with a significant population drain. Nearly 23% of homes there are sitting completely vacant. Think about that. Now compare that to Gilbert, Arizona, which is experiencing a massive influx of new people. Their vacant housing rate is a tiny 2.9%. It's an incredibly packed, high-demand market. Simply put, where people go, housing demand naturally follows. Moving right along to Section 2, Anatomy of a Doom Loop. Let's see how these macro numbers translate to the often painful reality of a single struggling city. We're going to zero in on St. Louis, Missouri, to understand the actual mechanics of urban decline. To really grasp what's happening in St. Louis, you've got to look back a bit. Once upon a time, in 1950, this was a buzzing industrial powerhouse with nearly 880,000 people. But over the decades, St. Louis has suffered a staggering 65% population loss. And guys, this isn't just ancient history. Recent census data shows the city lost over 21,000 residents just between 2020 and 2024. In 2024 alone, they lost over 3,000 people. A major and honestly often ignored factor keeping the city's population down is something demographers call natural decrease. Basically, it's just a situation where the number of deaths in a region consistently outpaces the number of births. In St. Louis, this local reality is being hit even harder by falling national birth rates, especially among younger adults. So how does this outmigration trigger what economists call a doom loop? Well, it's a vicious cycle. First, people leave for the suburbs. With fewer people around, foot traffic drops, so local stores and businesses are forced to close their doors. Because there are fewer residents and businesses, the city's tax base shrinks dramatically. And with less tax money coming in, the city literally can't afford to maintain its schools, roads, or public safety. The infrastructure degrades, which, you guessed it, only causes more people to leave. It just pulls the city into a downward spiral of decay. As the Civitas Examiner points out, middle-class families are usually the very first to flee this loop. They get pushed out by concerns over crime and the instability of failing public schools, and they start searching for better resourced suburbs that can offer stronger social networks and family-friendly amenities. Which brings us to Section 3, the blueprint for growth. Because, hey, it's not all doom and gloom. Let's pivot and look at the actual strategies and indicators that separate dying cities from thriving ones. Because growth always leaves clues. A huge, glaring indicator of a city's health is rapid new home construction. Cities like Port St. Lucie down in Florida and Frisco in Texas are building well over 2,200 new homes for every 100,000 people. That absolutely dwarfs declining tech hubs like San Francisco, which managed to build less than 450. The reality is, if a city isn't building, it's very likely stalling. So how do struggling cities fight back? Well, city officials in places like St. Louis are getting pretty creative. They're attempting to completely rewrite outdated 1950s zoning laws to legalize accessory dwelling units and much denser housing. At the exact same time, they've launched intentional initiatives to attract international migrants. They're targeting 15,000 new immigrants by 2030, hoping these newcomers will replenish the workforce and jumpstart new businesses.
Okay, Section 4, an unlikely urban revival. This brings us to a really fascinating real-world example of a town that experienced this dynamic firsthand. We are drawing strictly from data and accounts detailed in a recent Supreme Court amicus brief focusing on Springfield, Ohio.
According to the details in the brief, prior to 2021, Springfield was dealing with severe brain drain and the loss of major employers. The filing outlines deep civic blight, noting that major retailers like Target had left town. Even the closure of a neighborhood Kroger back in 2018 left residents in the south of Springfield living in a food desert, entirely without access to fresh produce. The history here is quite the roller coaster. After decades of population decline, the brief outlines that the arrival of Haitian workers starting around 2021 actually sparked an incredible economic turnaround. Factories were adding third shifts and wages went up. However, the filing notes this revival was disrupted in 2024 when national political rhetoric sparked safety concerns. The brief claims this caused immigrants to flee, resulting in Springfield suffering the highest job losses in all of Ohio by late 2024. Before that recent disruption, the financial impact of these new residents was undeniable. The expanding workforce helped push the city's municipal income tax revenue to an impressive $48.5 million by 2023. To put that into perspective, back in 2010, they were sitting at just around $27 million. This influx of cash is what allowed for crucial improvements to their roads and school systems. The filing also highlights warnings from local business leaders and officials, like former County Commissioner Melanie Wilt. They argue that removing these workers from the labor force will frankly devastate local commerce. Without these workers, manufacturers report they simply cannot run at full capacity, which directly impacts the city's overall economic health. And this brief issues a really stark warning about the future. Without this specific population, the city projects a return right back into that doom loop. They project a shrinking tax base, failing road repairs, and the collapse of retail. They specifically note the fear that Groceryland, the very last remaining grocery store on the south side, will close, bringing that food desert right back. All right, final section, Section 5, the future of our cities. Let's zoom back out to the macro level to see what all of these case studies and data points mean for the broader landscape of American urban centers. Looking at the data across all 117 cities, from St. Louis to Springfield to San Francisco, the takeaway is crystal clear. The ultimate survival of any city today depends entirely on a few key factors. They must be willing to adapt to remote work and new economies. They absolutely have to reform outdated housing zoning to allow for new construction. They must maintain safe schools and reliable infrastructure. And perhaps most crucially, they have to be willing to welcome diverse, new populations to sustain their workforce and their tax base. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Think about your own hometown for a second. When you look around at the new construction, the local businesses opening or closing, and the people moving in or out, are you seeing the blueprints for growth or the anatomy of a decline? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the data, and I'll catch you next time.